Hello, my beautiful friends, my fellow sparkly space blobs and angelic butterflies emerging into the world or entering into the goo phase. You know that I love it when you are here with me, and we get to share these moments of connection, softness, intention, empowerment, deep intuition, and to remember how powerful that energy is. And every time we get to come into this space and reclaim that for ourselves is, for me, a momentous, beautiful thing every single time. And we are going to be talking about a transit that for me is one of my favorite to work with, one of the most helpful, one of the most restorative, one of the most renewing. And this is also a really important transit right now. It's extremely countercultural. It means we're going to be working with the nonlinear, with the communicative, with the interweaving of so many worlds, of getting back into synchronistic thinking, into intuitive thinking, into non-linear process. And this is going to be part of what empowers us to start creating new things, start to envision and embody beauty into a world that really, really needs it. And I'm feeling this deeply. I am in need of this as just as much as anybody else. I was crying so hard last night. I was feeling the waves of energy just moving through my body. I had to just let that process move through me. And I woke up this morning feeling really, really clear about how important it is to set ourselves up to feel empowered to work with the interwoven magic of the universe and to remember our connectivity. We aren't these shattered individuals who are disempowered and lost in the world. We are doing so much together. And a lot of us, I just want to remind us all right now, a lot of us that are sensitive, that have sensitive bodies, that feel things deeply, we are doing so much energetic work right now. Many of us are feeling a little bit sensitive, a little bit fragile. We might be feeling tired, unmotivated. A lot of other elements might be coming in. We're all a little different on this front. That makes so much sense. And I'm hoping that this conversation today will help you feel empowered, calm, clear, confident, curious, open to how the intuitive weaving of the world is speaking to each of us, connecting each of us, and opening the road forward. So I'm going to give us a little bit of a context for this particular Venus retrograde, get us kind of situated in that, and then I'm going to talk about a few ways to approach this Venus retrograde, to work with it, to make the 6 weeks of Venus retrograde a time where you feel you can come back to your center and deep sense of empowerment. And if you want support, I am going to be doing a wild dreaming series over on my Patreon, and we're going to meet every single week. I'm going to offer up a really deep practice that is going to include surrealist art, getting into nonlinear thinking, creativity, freedom of expression, and centering. I'm really looking forward to moving through that journey with my beautiful wild dreamers over there. So I highly recommend coming and joining me for that. But with that, let's get into this Venus retrograde and find that clear, centered empowerment. Just to get us settled into this space of Venus retrograde, let's just talk about when this is happening, what it's going to be sitting in, what's going on here. So Venus retrograde runs from March 1st to April 12th. And it will be starting off in Aries and moving back into Pisces. And I love that transition across from the first sign to the 12th sign. It's so symbolically powerful. And the last time we had this particular Venus retrograde that began in Aries and moved back into Pisces was 8 years ago. And Venus has an 8-year cycle where she returns to the same sign or signs that she was in 8 years previously. And so this would have been March into April of 2017. So if you have journals or you want to think about what was going on in your life in 2017 during March and April of that year, it's a really interesting way to kind of think about how you work with Venus retrograde, how you might work with this particular combo of energies, how it connects to you. And it's also a great way to connect in with just how we've changed over an 8-year cycle like this, such an organic cycle. And in those 8 years, Venus has been doing this beautiful pattern called the Petals of Venus, which takes 8 years. It's the 13 revolutions around the sun, and it creates this beautiful shape in the way that Venus moves through the sky, which I always really, really love. And so it's just nice to check in with that 8-year cycle and what it's brought about. Of course, our last Venus retrograde was only a year and a half ago in 2023 in Leo, and that was a beautiful journey as well. And a Venus retrograde happens about every 18 months. So these are pretty regular, you know, they come up quite regularly for their renewal. And Venus retrograde is an interesting retrograde, specifically because Venus has a very tight relationship to the sun and meets up with the sun and disappears and transforms from the evening star into the morning star during this Venus retrograde. And because it gets so close to the sun, it conjuncts the sun right at the center of Venus retrograde and then starts to transform into the morning sun. And because of Venus's meet up with the sun here from our little perspective here on Earth, our little precious perspective here in this precious, beautiful world that we live in, it appears that Venus disappears. And this is her rebirth. This is the rebirth cycle of Venus. Once Venus meets up with the sun, that is the beginning of a new 18-month cycle. So this is a really beautiful, symbolic transit around the themes of releasing what no longer serves and opening ourselves up to what wants to be birth next. And I always like to mention with retrogrades that they are an optical illusion for us sitting here in the world that we live in. We're seeing planets moving slightly differently in the sky. And so what seems like the movement of going backward in the sky, of moving back and retrograding into old patterns, old beliefs, or in doing slow, subtle work that feels as though we are going backward, we are not, in fact, going backwards. We are moving forward, but we're doing it in a way that is nonlinear, that is surprising, that is interesting. And that brings me around to Venus. Let's just talk about Venus for a moment, because if you know me, you know that I love to liberate an archetype and energetic from the constraints of especially superficial modern astrology, which tends to be kind of about appearances and money and getting what you want, which is just kind of boring, to be honest. So let's talk about Venus, because Venus is often boxed into a very superficial lens of, yes, Venus is about what we love and value. At its core, I would say that is one of the most important things about Venusian wisdom. What do we really care about and love? But that often gets translated into thinking about how we're making money and the items we have around in our house and the way that we physically are beautiful or attractive in the world, or the partners that we're trying to attract in. And while all of those things are valid expression points in our lives and they play an important role in experiencing a life, they're totally valid, I want us to kind of expand Venus as we're heading into this particular Venus retrograde to think about it as a countercultural energetic as well. Because Venusian wisdom says that things that really bring us to life are never going to be in amassing things, just getting our way all the time, controlling ourselves, and having the perfect appearance. It's going to be in the subtle weaving and the subtle receptivity of a conversation with the universe, with ourselves, with those around us, in the interwoven quality of that connection. And Venus retrograde invites us into that non-linear thinking in a really, really powerful way. Venus retrograde symbolically is also so powerful and historically has been connected with a lot of storytelling about death and rebirth throughout the world. It lasts for about 42 days each time. And this is a significant number. So many traditions will have mystics go out into the wilderness or the desert for about 40 days to gain wisdom, to gain vision, and to come back changed and renewed. And these journeys are very, very powerful in releasing an identity that no longer serves and coming into something deeper and truer. And Venus retrograde is also deeply associated with journeys to the underworld. We'll see this in stories like Inanna, Persephone, and even Mary Magdalene, storytelling around the idea of an individual entering into the underworld to dig in the midnight garden, to unearth and sit with the bones of things that have come to pass, to release, to gain wisdom, to connect with soul, and in doing that, to be liberated, to come back into the world with new gifts, vision, and insight. So this is a very mystic journey that we take here with Venus retrograde. And of course, I don't want to intimidate any of us and be like, well, we're about to go to the underworld. It's going to be really tough. That's not it at all. Venus is still a very soft teacher, subtle, often will be showing us places where we just need to be kinder to ourselves, loosen up, be a little bit gentler in our process, grieve, release, relax into it, feel good about knowing that we have to process energy, that this doesn't just have to be a punishing journey, that in fact it's the journey of liberation, cohesion, and clarity that we are going for. And like I mentioned, Venus in this journey to the underworld transforms into the morning star, into new beginnings. This Venus retrograde also happens as it crosses the border between Aries and Pisces, which is a very sacred threshold and doorway between the individual self, the experience of individuality of the fractured self that has been cut off from other and is experiencing that individual expression, and Pisces, the collective, connected, interconnected, universal knowing. And we can almost think about this as left and right brain thinking. The left brain being where we think through things linearly, we think things through individually, we think through the process and how it has to go. And Pisces, the right brain vision, where everything is so complex, interconnected, and nonlinear that often our analytical minds can't actually find words or expression for it, but it is something that we experience in art, in music, in meditation, in walking in nature, and in other cosmic places like dreaming. So we're working on this border between those two things, and we're moving in between these two states. We're asking questions about it. We're turning things on their head. We're moving between the linear and the nonlinear, the individual and the collective. We are moving between death and rebirth as we work through this Venus retrograde and go back out of Aries and into Pisces. And then eventually Venus will, of course, move forward again, back forward through Pisces and back into Aries in the post-shadow phase. So we're working with energy that is turning things on its head. It's asking us to look at things from a completely different perspective. It's asking for us to release expectations about the process of healing and renewal. Now, this doorway is also an invitation to new worlds, and it means that we are going through a process collectively as well as individually of questioning what matters, what brings us to life, what is really feeding our souls, and preparing the path for new worlds to be born. And with this kind of conversation around this doorway between Aries and Pisces, there are a lot of elements that are also going to be playing through that doorway conversation during this Venus retrograde. We have a Mercury retrograde in Aries happening March 14th to April 6th, so a big chunk of this Venus retrograde will also include a Mercury retrograde. We have eclipse season moving through during this Venus retrograde. So we're going to have a lunar eclipse in Virgo on March 14th and an Aries solar eclipse on March 29th. And then we also have Neptune shifting from its home sign of Pisces into Aries on March 30th, 31st, and shifting through that doorway after a very long time in Pisces. So we can also be thinking, this is one of those Venus retrogrades that's very much aligned with other things going on. And it's kind of this larger process of churning the soil going on. And I mention that because I think for any of us who are kind of, even if we don't have the title of energy worker, we do something else or we're busy with our families, whatever, we may not think of ourselves as energy workers as like a title. Many of us are doing this very powerful, energetic tilling of the soil. And that is why I was really excited to sit down and talk through this Venus retrograde with you all, because I really want to enunciate that in our conversation today and remind each of us that is going on, which means we need to take really good care of ourselves. Drinking our water, trying to find ways to rest and restore throughout our day and our week in whatever way that looks like for us, but really prioritizing it, finding those recharging points. It's very helpful to, of course, limit how much, we're taking in from the internet and from social media, because that is very exhausting. Because we're preparing a new path, we're tilling the soil, we are opening and birthing a new world energetically right now. We are shedding skins, we are shedding identities, we are shedding systems and our participation in certain things. And all of that is quite energetically powerful and also subtle and hidden, and it doesn't look like something that you can put on your to-do list and say, okay, today I can clearly see that I did my homework. A lot of times it will feel like, oh, I'm feeling worse today. I'm feeling more tired today. I'm crying more today. Does that mean that I'm like further from my true path? For me, the answer is no. This is like kind of part of that work. But of course, Venus retrograde isn't just about like the harsh grieving or digging in the midnight garden. That couldn't be a part of it. And that can be very liberating and healing and connecting. But Venus is also about joy and enjoyment and what we value and what we love and what brings us to life. So I think it's also important during this time to spend time focusing on things that bring you to life, noticing what they are, noticing what rules you might have about when you're allowed to engage in them, when you're allowed to give yourself the gift of being with yourself through the process. This is also going to be one of those Venus retrogrades where we feel places of tension and resistance in ourselves, and then we feel them release and we open. And one thing I like to play with during Venus retrograde in general is when I feel contracted and when I feel open, and to notice the conversation that's going on there, because these are really two sides of the same coin. Often where we feel the most contracted is where we're also opening up more for what is next. A few things that I want to say as well about how to approach this Venus retrograde. Don't be afraid to try doing things out of order or in a non-linear fashion. We have to kind of get out of some of the rigidity we might have about how we're treating ourselves in our lives. I will often have, I have a routine for how I get things done in my week. And sometimes, I might wake up and be really, really tired or have like not such a clear head. And I'll have this rule in my head that I have to do the things that I set out to do in that day, regardless of how I'm feeling. And of course, that's always a very frustrating proposition. And it never really like plays out the way I want it to, because half the time I don't even get the things done. I just torture myself about them. And this is a really great place to really hear when your body's saying, not today, I need to do something different. And be willing to try it out. Because here's the thing. Venus retrograde, like I said, it's countercultural. It's going to give us solutions and insights that aren't from sitting down and objectively doing a pros and cons list, objectively thinking about what's wrong in the world and how am I going to fix it and how am I going to be responsible for it. That's one part of the process, but that part of the process is held within a much larger web of information. And what we're being asked to do is to change our perspective to allow in that larger web of information. So doing things out of order, doing things in a non-linear fashion, just sketching something out on a piece of paper, rolling around on the floor, taking a break, saying no when we don't feel like doing something are all liberating processes that are very deeply connected to this death and rebirth process of Venus right now. So I encourage you to just lean into that more, experiment with it more. That also leads me into listen in for intuition and synchronicity really, really deeply. I often find with Venus retrograde that my intuition and synchronicity is really loud. Whether or not I listen to it is a whole other topic of letting it in. But this is a really great time to experiment with that as well. Play around with it. Really notice when your intuition is nudging at you. Really notice when information is coming in and allow yourself to follow that intuitive nudge and guidance. kind of throughout the day, and just experiment with it during these 6 weeks. It's a really, really great time for that. Another thing that's powerful, pay attention to your dreams. If you are a napper like me, my nap dreams tend to be so powerful and visually stunning. But if you're any kind of dreamer at all, even if you just like lay down and do a light meditation and have visions, this is one of those times when intuitive, visionary images are going to be landing. I highly recommend keeping a synchronicity journal, a dream journal, any kind of notation you can do to attempt to translate the nonverbal into some kind of notes for yourself is very powerful right now. And I think what I'm trying to say here is that many of us are saying, I'm not going to uphold these expectations about appearances or productivity or giving my nervous system away to power systems that don't feel good. We're not doing that. I'm tired of doing that. I want us all to feel that we can intentionally start putting it towards the interwoven conversation of the universe and really prioritize it and put it first, and use this transit as an excuse to do that in a powerful, powerful way. The final thing I want to say about this before we get to the end of this time together is I want us to just let go of all the messages around putting pressure on yourself to get superstitious about this transit. There are so many messages that come in the superficial astrology world that will tell you, don't cut your hair, don't buy clothes, don't do anything to your body because you are confused about what you like and enjoy during Venus retrograde. I think that's a lie, first of all. I'm sorry. I disagree so deeply about that. And it kind of almost makes me mad when I see those messages. Also, getting superstitious about love or relationships. We can trust ourselves. We can trust our intuition. And I know that's a complex conversation, the intuition thing, especially if you've been through trauma, you have PTSD, you are neurodivergent. Some of us, we are working on differentiating and getting back in touch with our intuition. And it's a long, interesting journey that can be very complex. And how we figure that out, that's a complex topic. I realize that. But I think I just want us to feel that we don't have to go into this Venus retrograde feeling like this is just going to be this trying time where nothing's working out and we don't know what we look like and we don't know what we love or value. I think it's the exact opposite. This is a time where we get really clear on what we value. We get really clear on how we want to treat our energy systems. We get really clear on what actually matters. And it's not the superficial stuff. It's not always appearance based. It's not always about amassing things. It's about finding this core depth and clarity. And in doing that, we are reborn through that Piscean Aries doorway into a sense of individuality that is connected, that is clear. And that is the most powerful thing that we can do during this Venus retrograde. And I want every single one of us that's energetically sensitive, connected, to feel that we can use this time to get so centered and powerful and empowered. That is my dream. I'm going to pull one card to help us enter into this very powerful, symbolically rich, entrancing transit that I love it so much. I find Venus retrograde to be one of the most honest, clear times for me where I really understand what to focus on, how to hone my vision. And I'm hoping that we can share in that together. Let's see what wants to come out. Ace of Wands. That is so perfect in this context of reworking our relationship to belonging and individuality that this Venus retrograde going through that threshold is doing. Ace of Wands is so Aries. It has such an Aries energetic to it. And that I keep mentioning it, but it's we're tilling the soil, we're allowing the river of life to wash away debris. We are coming into new language, new understanding and clarity, even through some of the deep contrast and cruelty that is also apparent in the world right now. And so many of us are coming into a sense of our individuality that's not based on just like me and mine, but is based on a sense of deep security that is like just open and soft and curious about how to make the next thing and how to connect the next pieces and how to build in different ways. And I think it's easy sometimes to lose sight of this kind of Ace of Wands renewal beginnings energy because there's this other thread running right now that's a lot louder and a lot more destructive moving through. But that's what's so interesting about Venus retrograde in general and what's going on energetically right now, because there's a lot of loud, destructive noise. And then there is a ton of this very, very quiet, very energetically active weaving that is going on simultaneously. And many of us are involved in that weaving. And it often we will think it's not enough. The weaving isn't enough. The intentionality and the centering isn't enough. But I am here to tell you, and this Ace of Wands is here to tell you, that it is more powerful than we realize. And as soon as we recognize the deep power of it, because it will encourage inspired action, it will encourage inspired connectivity, it will encourage movement that is meaningful, purposeful, and clear. Once we realize that we can give ourselves the gift of trusting that, the weaving gets stronger. The action gets stronger. The foundational web weaving that we are doing becomes so loud and powerful. And I just want to reiterate it here at the end of our time together, because it's so important that we hear that as many times as possible right now. I need to hear that just as much as anybody else, going through lots of contrast, lots of heartache, lots of physical frustrations and tensions and exhaustions and challenges right now, alongside so many of you, I think. And I just want to give that love to this community and to each of us, and to feel that, light that fire, light that clarity, light that empowerment, that deep growl of knowing from the depths. And that's the thing, Venus can be such a badass when it is highlighted in a way that really taps into what actually matters. What actually matters. Yes, I am here for this. I am here for this so deeply. I'm getting very excited about this Venus retrograde. And like I mentioned, I am walking my wild dreamers over on Patreon through 7 sessions of practices, of surrealist art, of freeing ourselves from expectations about how journaling and meditation has to go, and getting into the visionary process of embracing this Venus retrograde. So I'd love to see you there. They're going to be available to my magic makers and my magic seekers, and every session will come out on Friday. So every Friday of this Venus retrograde, there will be a new practice. It begins on February 28th and runs through April 11th. I'm really excited to share these practices with you. These are so near and dear to my heart. I highly recommend joining me over there. And we are going to keep talking about all of this stuff. I can come back around to the Venusian energetics and the Piscean energetics. We're working with that North Node in Pisces. There's so much going on. We are going to be talking about so much, including the shift of Neptune and the eclipse season and the Mercury retrograde ahead. So we have a lot to dive into in the coming weeks, and I'm going to be right here for all of it. So I hope you will stick around. What is your key word, key feeling, key sense of this Venus retrograde? I would really love to hear what that is for you and how you want to work with and embody this Venus retrograde and this transitional death and rebirth journey that we are going on. Let me know in the comments, and I will see you back here very, very soon.